Grace and peace, and spoiler alert for The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. My name's Ryan. I'm the movie pastor. I watch movies and sometimes now TV series because the movie theaters are closed, and I think about them theologically. Mandalorian happened, and while I saw the first season way back last year before I was talking about TV series, having just finished the second season, I want to talk about it. Everybody's talking about it. And particularly, I'm really interested in what's going on now, right now, because of Mandalorian in the zeitgeist of Star Wars fandom and canon. Someday, what I'd love to do, if I can ever get organized enough, because it is such an enormous body of work, is to make a movie about Star Wars as a whole. And the way in which I find the mythology of Star Wars to be exactly that, to be a mythology. And to the fact that we can talk about different stories within the Star Wars universe and use words like canon and non-canon, right? That there is an apocrypha, and people will quote to each other chapter and verse from different parts of the Star Wars narrative. And since that is the case, and since we, generally speaking, as a culture, enjoy Star Wars, like it's not a nerd thing anymore, it's gone mainstream, I think we can use Star Wars, and we can use deep thinking about Star Wars to illustrate and to improve our deep thinking about other things, including Christian theology, where sometimes we're actually loathy to think deeply. Mandalorian is saving Star Wars. I really don't think that is an exaggeration or that's too much to say. Some people are saying, I don't like Mandalorian that much, like every episode's kind of a video game quest. Fine, you don't have to like it, but it is making Star Wars into something that people like again after Last Jedi kind of destroyed some things. Now, I also know there's a lot of defensiveness of Last Jedi. Last Jedi is not so bad. It was a bunch of angry anti-feminists that got mad at Last Jedi. I hear that, but again, after Last Jedi, there was a massive need for like a course correction. They hired J.J. Abrams back. J.J. Abrams did the J.J. Abrams thing, which is to do nothing original and to go back to the well and to ask a bunch of questions and never answer them. And it made it a passable movie, but it spent most of its time trying to undo Last Jedi, and like the fandom, which is already a challenging fandom. I grew up watching Star Wars, and now I'm old and I've got a kid, and so the things that I liked a bunch when I was 9 years old, doing more of that doesn't appeal to me in the same way. We've just been left with a sense of dissatisfaction. And Mandalorian is fixing that. And that is fascinating. Like, what does it take to make people who have grown to feel disfavorable about a text love that text again? I think that's a fascinating theological question and a fascinating ecclesiological question. Now, ecclesiology is the study of church and ministry, right? How is it that we do text? When we add to the theological conversation, what do we add to it that will enliven the conversations that we've had previously, and that will engage more inclusively? Mandalorian does that by being a Western. To say that it's a Western is also to say that it's a samurai movie. Westerns and samurai movies are the same. They're a part of the same genre. Westerns cribbed samurai movies, sometimes really explicitly. So like Yojimbo was remade as Fistful of Dollars. Seven Samurai was remade as The Magnificent Seven. And Westerns and samurai movies have a kind of interesting characteristic in that early ones tended to be black and white morality tales, where you had like a black hat versus a white hat, good samurai versus bad samurai. And late ones, as the range started to close, or the samurai era started to come to an end first, tended to be more morally gray, where a stranger comes to town, a man with no name, and he follows a code and we need his help, but he doesn't do things the way we do them, and can we trust him, and who is he? Asking those sorts of ambiguous questions. So it's a great setting for a Boba Fett type bounty hunter character. It's also a brilliant homage to Star Wars A New Hope, where it was very clearly inspired by Hidden Fortress, a Kurosawa film that follows two foot soldiers as they face an evil guy in a black mask. So much of Star Wars Episode 4 was inspired by this narrative, but didn't go on to be that. Star Wars was a space opera. It was essentially a fantasy. That to then go and say, yeah, well, for an older audience, we're going to take the fantasy of the knight-errant and we're going to go Western with it, makes every kind of sense. And it allows us to do a lot of the same things that I think Last Jedi was trying to do, and might even create more space, create more flexibility within the universe to make room for Last Jedi. I think another of our modern myths is the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we saw in the latest MCU movie, Avengers Endgame, the Thor the Dark World retroactively get better because of what happened in Endgame. So there's room for that within text that I think is really, really fascinating. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I could talk about it for a long time, but I kind of just want to open that can of worms and then invite discussion. What do you think about the way in which we can add source material to source material? One of the ways in which I saw it done in season 2 that was more explicitly theological was when Mando met Bo-Katan. So there's a problem there, right? Because now we are putting the world of The Mandalorian into the world of the Clone Wars series. And we've made statements about who Mandalorians are and how they act in the Clone Wars series that don't jibe with what we said about Mandalorians in The Mandalorian. Season 1 was all about, you've never taken off your helmet, right? That would be a terrible thing. Mandalorians don't do that. Here's how we live. And now introducing Bo-Katan could create a problem. And the way that The Mandalorian chose to deal with that is to reveal that Mando was a part of a cult. She called him one of the children of the Watch who follow the way of the Mandalore. So he's an extreme religious sect member. And he just grew up with that on Navarro. That's everything he's known, and is now being exposed to a wider breadth of Mandalorians, to people who do it differently, including Boba Fett, who's not really a Mandalorian at all. He just uses Mandalorian armor, but uses it rightfully and well. And Bo-Katan, who's the heir to the throne of Mandalore, and he's got to ask questions. Okay, how much of what I've been taught religiously do I need to keep, and how much do I need to throw out? Again, this happened in Last Jedi, but it was Luke Skywalker, and he was looking at Jedi teachings and uncovering new Jedi beliefs, but also trashing them all, letting them burn. And this, by putting it in a new context, by engaging with the religious community of the Mandalorians, which we haven't seen as much in the big flagship series, it gives us more room to explore and just feels more respectful of the source material, the things that fans like me grew up honoring and appreciating and saying, don't mess with that stuff. But still, hey, let's mess with stuff, because I don't want to be bored. So the result of that, then, again, started from a problem, started from hey, we've got too much source material, and there's going to be a contradiction between the Mandalorians we want to have and the Mandalorians we've had before. It created what I think is maybe the first, or at least the most mainstream discussion of fictional fantasy radicalism, right? Like, how do we engage with fundamentalism and beliefs, and what is the process of discipleship going on in space with a religion that has been invented for the purpose of having that discussion? We get to watch Mando as he begins to piece apart and look at the facets of his religion and say, what are the pieces I want to keep and hold fast to, and what are the pieces that I need to be flexible about? Head coverings are a literal question among religious sects in the world today. Very conservative communities tend to have rules about head coverings. And Mando is forced to ask real, active theological questions about, okay, but what about when that command intersects with other commands that I feel are important? We saw this with the coronavirus in the Sikh community, where a number of Sikh doctors had to cease to follow some of their religious traditions in order to follow what they felt were the more important tenets of their religion to save people. They had to shave their beards in order for the masks to fit and the personal protective equipment to work. That's going on in Mandalorian, and it's showing us in, I think, a really effective and respectful way. This is also something I've experienced. You know, when I grew up, I went to one church. It was my church. It was the church I went to. And the people who went to my church were the normal people. And when I went to college, I went to a Christian college, but it was Lutheran. And I encountered people who were Christian, but in a different way. And that is how spiritual growth takes place. So I'm really excited to kind of see that explored. And it's not the sense of chuck it out the window that we literally saw with Last Jedi, but instead a new discussion rising in, a central myth of our American and perhaps global popular culture. If you enjoyed this discussion of Mandalorian, I hope you check out some of these other videos that I've made about other movies, but make sure to click down here, because you might not have seen any of those, but you'll have seen something I've seen, I promise. Let's keep talking.